What would you have seen if you could travel back in time to the splendorous city of Constantinople during its peak in 540 AD? What grandiose monuments would you have seen? What wonders could you have witnessed? Let us thus explore this fascinating, magnificent city of Constantine that would continue the legacy of Rome for 1,000 more years after the light of Roma had been extinguished in the West. I am utterly fascinated by the urban structure of late antique cities and have already made quite a few videos about the state of Rome over the course of its long history. You can find some of the videos here. But now it is finally time to give Constantinople, the new Rome as it was also sometimes called, Nova Roma, the attention that it deserves. For make no mistake, this city was Roman, yes, different than Rome, where the Roman Empire had started, but the inhabitants were Romans until the bitter end in 1453 AD, 2206 AUC, so 2206 years after the founding of Rome. If you would have a time machine and could travel back to ancient Constantinople during its peak, which year should you choose? When was its peak even? Well, I would argue that the peak of the city was shortly before the outbreak of the Justinian plague in 541 AD. By that time, almost all of the grandiose monuments had been completed and shone brightly, and thus the city would have appeared the most magnificent. But also population-wise, the year 540 or 541 would have marked the peak, where most scholars estimate the population to have been somewhere in the ballpark of 500 or 600,000 inhabitants. After the plague of Justinian, the population took a massive hit, with some estimates saying that as much as 40% of the population of the city had been killed by this brutal disease. And then, when the population had started to recover, the next disasters struck. First, a devastating war with Persia, and then the weakened empire saw its provinces of Levant and Egypt conquered by the Arabs, due to still not having recovered from the war against Persia and from the plague. Thus, the population of Constantinople had already fallen to barely 200,000 inhabitants by the year 700, only a third from its peak population 160 years earlier. Large parts of the city would have appeared deserted. Many buildings started to fall into disrepair, and the forums started to be used as cattle markets. We would see a resurgence of the old might around the year 1000, but that also didn't last long, and Constantinople would never be as magnificent and splendorous again as it had been around the year 540 during the age of Justinian. Let us thus enter 540 AD into our fictional time machine. And please like this video and subscribe, and also turn on the bell so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And if you want to suggest video topics of your own, participate in polls, chat with other enthusiasts of the Roman Empire, or participate in exclusive live streams with me or our team, you can gain these perks by supporting our work on Patreon or via becoming a YouTube member. Thanks to your support, we will be able to explore many different topics of the late Roman Empire. Gratias ago tibi, amici. So now you have traveled to the year 540. Let us say that you enter the city from the west, arriving by land, and not by sea. Arriving from the west, you would first already see the massive Theodosian land walls in the distance, and even further away, the giant hippodrome, where the chariot races took place. You would near the city and you would already be struck by the sheer massiveness of the Theodosian land walls. This wall system that had been built during the reign of Theodosius II, completed in 413 AD, was truly massive. It actually consisted of 3 walls, a low wall, an outer wall and an inner wall, and a moat filled with water as a first barrier. These walls would defend the city many times, and only in the year 1204 AD would the city be sacked for the first time since the construction of these fortifications. You would then proceed and would near the largest gate, the impressive Golden Gate, the Porta Aurea. On this massive gate, you would see life-sized golden statues greeting you. After passing the gate, you would then enter a long magnificent street, the main street of Constantinople, called the Mese. It was beset by columns to the side and would branch off to the sides to churches or monasteries that were built nearby. To your left, you would see mostly empty fields, as the urban area in that part had not reached the Theodosian land walls. But as you would continue towards the east, so would the density of the surrounding buildings increase. After walking about 1 kilometer, you would then pass a portico, the Sigma, where the Mese merged with another street. You would then already see the older and smaller Constantinian land walls, and the old Golden Gate in these walls. You would continue your itinerary along the Mese, still surrounded by many columns to the side of the street to your left and to your right. A few hundred meters after passing the old Golden Gate, you would enter the first large imperial forum, the Forum of Arcadius. In the middle of this forum, you could marvel at the column of Arcadius. This was a true classical imperial forum, as you would have encountered in Rome itself. After passing this forum, a few hundred meters later, you would pass the Forum of the Ox. You would see a large bronze statue representing the head of an ox. Passing this grand imperial forum, you would then pass the Philadelphion. Now this was a truly magnificent forum with colonnaded walls surrounding the Capitolium, which was fashioned after the old classical temples, but not used as a temple anymore since the pagan cults were forbidden by that time, but as an academy of higher education. We can thus see that Constantinople retained some of its old Roman pagan roots. Going further, you would then enter the Forum of Theodosius, also known as the Forum Tauri. Here there was an impressive triumphal arch of Proconnesian marble that had 3 passageways. Now the density of buildings to all sides was already extremely high, with many apartment buildings in the style of the old Roman insulae. Only thus could 600,000 people live on a surface area of 14 square kilometers, giving us an extremely high population density of 42,000 people per square kilometer. And you would feel this very high population density. There would be people everywhere. It would be a commotion such as one can today maybe only encounter in the densest cities of the world. You would continue towards the east and would pass the Tetrapylon. This was a 4-sided arch with a pyramid shape and a statue placed on top. Then you could enter the magnificent Forum of Constantine through a triumphal arch. Contrary to the other fora, this one had a round shape. In the center, you would see the column of Constantine with his statue on top, fashioned after the sun god Sol. You would see the Senate House, where the Senate of Constantinople met, continuing the old Roman tradition, long after the last senators of the West had ceased to exist after the mid-6th century. But here in Constantinople, the senators would still meet in this building, fashioned after the old round temples of Rome, such as the Pantheon, with large columns at the entrance and the large central rotunda. You would then exit the forum towards the east through another triumphal arch, continuing along the colonnaded main street, the Mese. A few hundred meters after the Forum of Constantine, to the right, you would enter the Hippodrome, the large circus, fashioned after the old Roman circuses. Although smaller than the Circus Maximus in Rome, it could still hold an impressive 100,000 spectators. There, you could have witnessed chariot races, and quite often these would lead to brutal fights between the rivaling chariot racer factions. Going back to the Mese eastward, you would pass the Milion, another four-sided arch or tetrapylon. And then finally, you would arrive at the central space of the city, called the Augustaion. In the center, by 543 AD, we would see the column of Justinian, but in 540 it would probably not be there yet. However, you would see the baths of Zeuxippus to one side that had been reconstructed after they had burned down in the Nika riots in 532 AD. You might want to pay a visit to the baths of Zeuxippus and enjoy this old Roman tradition of visiting a public bath. And to the opposing side, you would see the giant and magnificent Hagia Sofia that had been completed only a few years earlier in 537 AD, the largest church of Christianity in that time. At the Augustaion, you would also see the Magnaura, which was actually the primary building where the Senate convened. One of the most remarked upon features in this building was the so-called Throne of Solomon, situated in its central apse, which is said to have been surrounded by automata in the form of trees, singing birds, and roaring lions that awed and delighted visitors. You would then marvel at the inside of the Hagia Sophia with its gigantic interior volume, the largest church building of Christianity, and then pass further towards the old Acropolis. Here you would be amazed to still find the old temples of ancient Byzantium, although they probably would have already been in a pretty bad shape, as the old pagan cults had been forbidden since 392 AD. The old temples were since then used as storage space for all kinds of goods, and would slowly fall into ruin in the following centuries. In 540 AD, they might have already been partially overgrown by vegetation. From the old Acropolis, you would have a magnificent view over the entire city. In the distance, you could see the aqueduct of Valens that supplied the city with fresh water. You would then visit the great cisterns that held large amounts of fresh water, such as the Basilica cistern, and the countless churches and monasteries throughout the city. You would also visit the many harbors of the city and marvel at the giant sea chain and the Theodosian sea walls that both protected the city from sea. This is how a time traveler might have seen ancient Constantinople in 540 AD, and I personally am always quite amazed to find how different the city must have looked, but sometimes also how very similar it looked to the old Rome in preserving some of its old pagan roots. The city truly did deserve the name New Rome, Nova Roma. We shall explore the urban landscape and history of Constantinople in much greater detail in future videos. And if you would like to know how Constantinople compared to Rome, you can watch this video here in the upper right corner. But if you are more interested in the urban history of Rome itself, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history and to all who are like me, absolutely fascinated by the late Roman Empire. Gratias amici imperi Romani, and bene vale.